and welcome to the Coeur d'Alene City Council meeting for June 18, 2024. I'll call this meeting to order, and the clerk will note that all council are present. And we will begin this evening with an invocation by Leslie Watson of the North Idaho Unitarian Universalist. Welcome.
Invocation is by Pastor Fred Torney. We seek guidance in this election year for all who will vote. May our choices work for the benefit of our nation, our state, and our community. Likewise, we seek guidance for our city council members, that their choices may work for the well-being of all the people who live in and visit our beloved and beautiful part of the world. Amen. So let it be.
Thank you. And now, Amy will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if I can spit it out.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kind of out of sync there.
Okay. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll wait for the public comment sign-ups.
Supermodel filter.
Wow, quite a list tonight. The first item signed up is Paul Truett from Hayden.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Paul Truett. I'm the CEO for a company called Lear Asset Management. We're a security contracting firm. We've worked all over the United States for lots of different agencies and worked with law enforcement and all the three-letter names that you could mention. But I want to thank you for coming here tonight and letting us speak tonight. So I'm going over the proposed ordinance tonight regarding the security agency ordinance. Are you familiar with that one? I'm sure. So wanted to just comment on the changes to this ordinance, proposed changes. So Section 1 looks fine. I've worked with a lot of agencies, a lot of law enforcement chiefs and sheriffs and task force commanders, and we all want to know who's on the streets and who's doing the work out there. It's very important. The relationships with law enforcement, in my estimation, are very important and very vital to the security of our citizens and people and the businesses and the community. So I think it's extremely vital that we work together, communicate together, and have common goals and standardized protocols so that we don't get confused in the field, because there's often sometimes that happens. So I'm very aware of that, and I've been involved in lots of really bad situations, and it's always ended well if law enforcement and us are communicating and working together. And so that's my goal for being here tonight, is just to kind of point out a few things that I think are legitimately, should be here, and a couple of things I think might be overreach. So one of those, the section where the training and Section 2 of prior to obtaining licensing, operating or engaging should have a minimum of 2 hours of security experience. Training, that's a no-brainer. That's very vital. I think training is essential. So everything down to Section 4, I think is very, very reasonable. We get to Section 4, we talk about the distinguishing from badges and patrol vehicles and those types of things. I think it's vital that we do have security on our vehicles, and so that we're distinguished. So I think that's very vital. I don't think that's asking too much. I don't have a problem with that at all. I think that's really good. We get down to the next section where we start talking about the logos and things like that. We're in the private industry, so all of us have, designs and things that we come up with. So I think we might be, kind of overthinking this. I think as long as we're not confusing law enforcement with security, I think that that's very vital. As long as security is on those cars and those patrol vehicles, I don't know that the logos have, you know, much, I mean, you know, it could be construed as overreach when we start looking at, you know, trying to make people change their whole fleet of 20 cars, you know, so that can be expensive for companies. So we want to think, as long as security and that is very clear on those vehicles, I think that's very vital. So I think to keeping it simple. Logos start to get into, you know, a whole bunch of stuff, so am I good to go? Probably not.
That's the end
3
of your
minutes?
3 minutes.
Okay, are we done?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to say, just, if I'm going to honor that, so, for most of the things I think in here, they're fine, but there is some overreach in there that I would like to have another discussion on. Thank
I
you.
have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Sir?
Paul, could you come back, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So is your objection just to section 4 then?
No, objection would be to section 4, yeah, that security would be sufficient. My objection would be to section 5. I would like to have another discussion on section 5, because I think that on behalf of the third party, when regards to crimes committing in the presence of security contractors, I've been involved in multiple crimes and multiple cases through court systems, and I think that you really have to trust the Idaho legislature and other legislatures that they've given provision for citizens and also for security companies under duress, which I mean would be something that a threat would be occurring and they're committed in their presence. I think they should be able to act on that due to the extenuating circumstances or exigent circumstances, which would be putting somebody in danger, maybe watching a crime committed that. So I would think that we need more discussion on that, on section 5. Section 6, and if it's okay if I continue, it's up to you. I can. Okay, so section 6 is a bit overreach also. I've worked with so many agencies, I've never been asked to have identification cards, contracts on hand and those types of things. Because if law enforcement has an issue with one of my employees or me or my company, they can simply handle that by addressing that individual who may have committed something that's not appropriate, and they can simply, you know, contact our company or the individual and then get that done. So it's a lot of added admin to these companies that are, you know, could be a lot of work, a lot of extra work, which would be expensive for our HR departments and stuff. So I think that's about it. So,
And regarding the security on the side of the vehicles, so on the way the new thing is written, you would have to redo that.
I would say we would need some discussion on it. I think we need to see how much, because some of the companies that have a lot of fleet vehicles, it could be enormously expensive to change their whole logos and all that stuff. If they're not, typically law enforcement wants to know that we're distinguishable. So on our uniforms, we have giant patches on the back, security contractor, we have security all over the front. And so, you know, that's very visible, it's very large, very bold. I think that's appropriate. I think that's, you know, I think that's not overreach. I think that's a good thing to have, because, so on the vehicles, I think as long as that security wording is sufficient and big enough, I think that the logos could be, unless they're saying police, which I don't know of anybody that does that. That would be very ignorant. So the admin stuff with all of the contracts and having copies of the contracts and, you know, listed of the employees, we have turnover like everybody else does. So sometimes that could be very laborious in the HR departments and trying to keep up with all that. I've never had any other agency ask me for any of that, and I've worked for the federal government. I've worked for a lot of different law enforcement agencies. So
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
That, for people that have not come before us for public comment, there's a clock over here on the side that shows you how much time you have left, and when it beeps, that means the end of your 3 minutes. John Swallow? Welcome, John.
Morning, or good evening. It's been a long day. My name is John Swallow. I live in Coeur d'Alene. Have a couple of commercial buildings here in Coeur d'Alene as well. Most people that know me know I'm somewhat of a history buff, so you can probably figure out why I'm standing up here today. I'm here to lend our support for the resolution number 24049, the approval of a temporary moratorium on demolition. And anyway, I won't read the rest of it. But anyway, what I'm here for is to ask you guys to strongly consider supporting the moratorium. I'm one of the first people to say I'm a big supporter of private property rights. I'm one of the first people to also say don't box me into a corner. Don't try to take away anything that we already have. However, I'm deeply concerned about the loss of our, kind of like the loss of our history or identity. I've lived a lot of different places. I grew up in Coeur d'Alene. I always was concerned that Coeur d'Alene could one day become, quote unquote, somewhere else. But we never really were headed that way. We're always kind of did our own thing. The last couple of years, I've actually been really concerned that we are starting to look like somewhere else. And a lot of other places have to reinvent themselves and things like that because they don't have the history we have. They don't have a downtown on a lake like we have. So I don't think we need to hurry into becoming somewhere else. I feel very fortunate to live in this time and place. I think most of us do, but I also think that history is going to look back upon this time and what we did with it to try to figure out, did we do the right thing? 180-day moratorium, I think, is fine. I wouldn't want to go any longer than that without some kind of a resolution as to where we should be going, but I do think we need to hit the pause button a little bit and kind of really just kind of reflect a little bit. Anyway, I didn't prepare anything for tonight. I wasn't even going to talk when I came here, but I just wanted to let you guys know that my family lends its support to this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
James Cook?
Thank you, Council, Mayor. Just a couple of thoughts. One is, as a resident of downtown Coeur d'Alene, I thank you and whoever else was involved for the noise ordinance on loud engines. Living downtown can be kind of a nightmare, especially in the summer and in late at night. So thank you. I think we've noticed a difference already. I noticed on the vision statement, our vision statement of Coeur d'Alene is of a beautiful, safe city that promotes a high quality of life and sound economy through excellence in government. And I became aware of this pedal pub idea that is apparently being promoted somehow with some folks on the council. And I just am encouraging you maybe to lend an ear to Chief White and ask him if he thinks that's a good idea to have a non-supervised tavern on wheels, as it might be, riding through our city. More importantly, riding through our neighborhood. As a downtown resident who would see this, whatever it is, bar on wheels pass by his own home, I'm strongly against this, and I don't see how a pub on wheels would marry up with your vision statement as the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Wagenfeller? Scott?
Thank you, Mayor, City Council members. I'm Scott Wagenseller, founder of Gates Security, a security company that provides alarm and camera installations, monitoring, 24-hour patrol and response, and private ranger services, including special event services. Tonight, you're being asked to consider a new city law proposed by your Police Chief Lee White. This law restricts residents and businesses the right to protect themselves and their property without prior notice, review, and approval of the city police. This overreaching law requires certain persons to wear distinctive emblems of the city's choosing in a crass and belittling manner. These persons are then to carry papers on them with identification that are to be surrendered to the city police at any time to justify their presence and actions in the city. This city law is something eerily reminiscent of something we've heard about over 80 years ago. But this proposed law, this authoritarian overreach, is not my only concern tonight. there's another issue that you might have to address that's not on the agenda. And that's that your city bureaucrat, Lee White, has presented this self-serving and overbearing law with only 4 days' notice and no community input, no stakeholder involvement. This kind of contempt for your position also shows his contempt for the citizens he serves. This overreach of city authority to regulate a business, a community, solves no problems, does nothing to improve public safety, and shows that the city police chief is aimed only at increasing his regulatory powers. He further proposes this law with no community input and no stakeholder involvement. Please consider whether this is his contempt or simple negligence. Thank you.
Thank you. Griffin Dietrich?
Good evening, City Council. My name is Griffin Dietrich, and I'm the Director of Business Development for Gate Security, and I'm a downtown Coeur d'Alene resident. Tonight you will vote on proposed changes to City Code relating to the security industry. In no way do these proposed changes benefit the public or the security industry. The only purpose that this amendment achieves is to diminish the ability of security to effectively operate at their clients' requests. It is important to note that this amendment's genesis is nothing more than the fear of impersonation, even though impersonation is a deliberate and intentional act. Relating to Section 4 of this, laws mandating the appearance of security uniforms in vehicles are not only a violation of freedom of expression, but would also prohibit the right for clients to choose how their security providers appear. Furthermore, this section is extremely ambiguous and leaves one position, the chief of police, with the ability to violate a business's freedom of expression. This entire section is a violation of the First Amendment relating to commercial free speech. This amendment does not pass the Central Hudson test, which is a four-pronged test established by the Supreme Court to determine if a regulation actually satisfies the First Amendment. Relating to Section 5, this section violates Idaho Statute 19-604, otherwise known as citizens' arrest rights. This law would prohibit a private person from effecting an arrest and would instead require police permission prior. It is not the police's responsibility to determine what action a private person, business, or security agent may take. Notwithstanding the unlawful portion of this amendment, our clients have the right to instruct us on how and when they want security to engage. This provision would render security unable to protect its clients. Relating to Section 6, put plain and simply, the police have no right or need to be informed of private contracts made between private entities. This amendment does not benefit the public whatsoever. These contracts contain private information such as rates, contact information, payment information, and contractual provisions, all of which are confidential. Private security's goal is to prevent crime, and the police department's goal is to apprehend criminals. This amendment does not aid the police department's goal of criminal apprehension, nor does it protect the public. City Council, I urge you not to pass these draconian measures, as they are filled with unlawful provisions that do not protect the public or government interest whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you. Shannon Sardell?
Mayor, council members, my name is Shannon Sardell. I'm Principal Historical Architect for Five Quarter Architecture, and I'm a member of your Historic Preservation Commission. I'm on the board for Preservation Idaho, and I do a lot of work with the Idaho Heritage Trust. I come tonight, thank you for having your open public comment, to talk about two things. One is the resolution number 24.049. I'd like to encourage your support for the temporary moratorium on demolition and moving permits and all that sort of stuff for all the regions that are listed in that. I could probably take 3 minutes to finish that title. This is a request for time, and it is not intended to stop or thwart process or progress, but only to give both the Historic Preservation Commission and the Downtown Core and Infill Working Group time to better assess what we have in Coeur d'Alene and how we can best support these places. This is a community-generated request. As we have recently seen, historic preservation and old places are cherished and do matter to the people that live here. And lastly, whatever your age or place in time, time keeps marching on and it keeps moving faster and faster. I often find myself in conversation with others who think towns on the East Coast and overseas have so much more history, and I'm often asked why I don't choose to work in those places. My response is always the same. There's plenty of history right here in the Pacific Northwest and Coeur d'Alene. We just don't bother to slow down and see it. These other places have had more time without modern interventions to figure out what is important, and out here, we have to work backwards against technologies and mindsets. Sometimes we forget we are making and protecting our own history and that our choices today do matter. So making a quick pivot, I also come before you tonight as a member of the community, asking you to send Council Bill number 24-1009 regarding amendments to the municipal code pertaining to billboards and electronic message displays for further review by your Community Planning and Zoning Commission and the Historic Preservation Commission. I also ask that further public comment be considered on this issue. From a historic preservation perspective, the amendments as opposed will have great effect on the historic context and character of historic places. These are two community aspects that are considered when designating historic places to either local or national historic registers. The 500-foot setback from historic places is about a city block, maybe a little less. And it's in a linear plane, meaning across the ground. But in a visual and an environmental view, these signs have greater effects that change the natural billboards that we already have of the mountains, the lake, trees, and prairie. I'll just stop there, but I'd like you to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Conaway?
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. My name is Jeff Conaway. I've lived in Coeur d'Alene for 35 years, own and operate Silver Creek Sign Company, and served on the Coeur d'Alene Sign Board for somewhat over 20 years. I don't know the exact amount of time, but it was quite a while. And I'm here tonight to speak about the billboard amendment that's been proposed where billboards will be permitted to be moved. And I have a question to ask you as a council. As I understand it, the billboards, the existing billboards will not actually be physically taken out of the ground and moved. They will be either dismantled or demolished, and new billboards will go up at a new location somewhere with the proper zoning, the C-17 zones and the light industrial zones within Coeur d'Alene, of which there's quite a bit of that property. And is that true?
That's correct.
Okay. So my point is that the billboards that we see, if this amendment is passed, the billboards that we see sprouting up will be new billboards in new locations. Now, the fact that one old billboard in some other location will be taken down does not, and so therefore there's no net increase in billboards here in Coeur d'Alene. That's good. I'm glad for that. But I think that still they need to be seen as new construction at new locations. And I think that will, number one, create probably more groundswell than you might anticipate from people that say, oh my gosh, what's that thing doing here? And my other question to you tonight is, how did this issue come up? The packet I got from Kelly Setters that first alerted me that this was happening, just as a member of the sign industry, said that the City Council had requested of staff to examine this ordinance and see what we could do to allow for moving billboards. Is this something that you guys just one day thought, well, we don't have enough to do, so we should do that too? Or was this
Actually, there was a request to be able to do that.
from one of the outdoor advertising
Yes.
companies, I would suspect?
Correct.
Okay. Well, again, I think I'm asking that you reject this amendment, or at the very least table it, and give more time for exploring what the people in general would want to see happen in the city. And I would further ask that you investigate the possibility of actually requiring sunset leases in the leases for existing billboards, and actually not simply living with the ones we have for years and years and years and years, but to sunset them in some reasonable amount of time so they could actually go away. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Jeff.
it.
Neil Schreibus?
Good evening. My name's Neil Schreibeis. I live in Kootenai County and I work for Lamar Outdoor Advertising. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to review this proposal to relocate, excuse me, the signs. And also like to thank the staff for all the effort and time and thought that they put into this to get it to this point. Our goal is to help businesses, especially local businesses, get their name, product, and services out to the largest audiences possible so that the businesses can grow, which will help them and benefit the entire community because those businesses will reinvest and also purchase from other businesses. We fully understand and agree that there needs to be some regulations in place. However, this proposal being presented has overcomplicated the permitting process. As example, why does the City Council need to review each application for relocation if the relocation meets all the requirements that you set forth? Why do you, the City Council, need to review and approve them? At a previous council meeting, it was suggested by relocating the billboards, it would help spread the signs out. The proposed ordinance is proposing to have all the 14 by 48 signs located within a block of I-90. That would be keeping them clumped together, not spreading them out. The proposal states that the city attorney would have to review all leases for the relocations in order to make sure that the businesses that are on the same property as the billboard do not advertise on the billboard, as that would enlarge the amount of their signage that is allowed per the sign code. This is both cumbersome to the billboard company and extra work for the attorney. It would be much simpler if it just stated that it is not allowed for an off-premise business to be on an off-premise sign at that location. And if it did occur, the permit could be revoked and the billboard would have to be removed. The proposed ordinance states billboards cannot be within 500 feet of a residential, school, park, church, historic district, cemetery, within in any direction. This also restricts the area in addition to the zoning restrictions that have already been made. Again, condensing to a smaller area. It was said that this is being done so that certain sensitive advertising is not being seen in those areas. It would be better to just not allow those sensitive advertising in those areas. Lamar already uses discretion voluntarily to do that. It was stated that they cannot control, that they, as in the city, cannot control the content, but by not allowing billboards in that area, they are already controlling the content. And they're controlling the content by not allowing a business on that property to advertise on a billboard. So there is some control they're already trying to put into place. The last thing I guess I would say is that we sent the city administrator a letter or an email with some other additions to what I've just said, and I think we sent that all to you guys, so I would hope that you would take a look at that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Johnny Liston?
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Johnny Liston, retired Naval Chief Petty Officer and employee of Yesco Sign Company. Thank you very much for allowing us to possibly move billboards to a new location. We only have one in the city of Coeur d'Alene. We are actually here to help support Lamar. Billboards are a voice for smaller businesses. I've only been in the billboard business for a little bit over a year now, and being able to see the smaller businesses advertise on there it's huge. In regards to the ordinance, we would like you guys to reconsider Charlie 3F, 3 Golf, 3 Hotel, and 3 India. We would like those stricken from the record, Mayor. That's all I have.
Thank you. Walter Burns?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Walter Burns, Chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. And no surprise, I'm here to speak in support of the demolition moratorium resolution before you tonight. As you know, our Historic Preservation Commission is still quite new, less than 5 years old since you created us in 2019. We were the last Idaho city of any size to create a state-affiliated Historic Preservation Commission. We were the 40th such commission in the state. Other Idaho HPCs have been operating much longer, many since the 1980s. In other words, we've had some catching up to do. We've worked very hard to do so. Due to our late start, Coeur d'Alene has arguably lost more of its historic fabric than other cities in Idaho, buildings that could perhaps have been saved or converted to another use. Their loss simply makes what remains all the more precious. Our commission is working very hard on plans and policies to preserve Coeur d'Alene's historic fabric. Currently, we're working to revise the city's demolition permit process to be more responsive to the needs of the community. We're working to establish new historic overlays to help protect the character of our neighborhoods. And we're working with the planning department, other city commissions, and with council to review and update the downtown core and downtown north and east overlays in direct response to council's request. The situation with the Roosevelt School, which is still unresolved, and the demolition of Dr. Fox's former home demonstrate how quickly a historic building can become threatened or even demolished. Adopting the resolution before you tonight will give us the time we need to thoughtfully complete the important initiatives we are focused upon and help keep pace with other Idaho communities without the risk of losing more historic resources in the interim. Thank you very much for your time and support.
Thank you, Walter. And lastly, Deb Mitchell.
Good evening. I'm Deb Mitchell, and I'm with the North Idaho Historic Preservation Advocates, and I'm here just to encourage you in passing Resolution 2449 and thanking you for putting it on the agenda. It's been a month or so since we first started talking about it. I was asked to say something. You've heard from Zoanne Thurman before. She wanted to remind me of one thing that she had said from the Bible in 1 Corinthians 6:12. She said, "All things are lawful, but not everything is beneficial." Meaning that even though we have rights to tear our homes or our buildings down, is it beneficial to our neighbors? Is it beneficial to our community? And I'd like to say something that was written by Dr. William Murtaugh, who is known internationally as the Lion of Preservation. He was also the first keeper of the National Historic Preservation and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. He believes that our culture has an ecology, and we need to take care of that. His quote is, At its best, preservation engages the past in a conversation with the present over a mutual concern for our future. And that's what your decision is doing tonight, is looking at the ecology of our culture and bringing about a conversation for our future. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public comments, and so we'll move on to announcements. Any announcements from council? Yes, Amy.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to take a moment to recognize a very important person sitting up here on the dais with us tonight and wish you a very happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
He hates this. He hates this. So we should all sing.
Yes.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. Mayor. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Chrissy, you had an announcement.
I did.
Moving rapidly along.
We'll still talk about how old you are if you want.
Well, yeah, we could.
I just want to tell the visitors to Coeur d'Alene, people who live here, if you visit the Atlas Water Park, some great things have been happening down there the last couple of years, with just the beach, the water park, the beautiful park, the fun places for the kids to play. But they now have an ice cream truck, which with the pup cones, so my dogs, they know right where to go now. And then they also have a burger shack and a coffee truck that have all appeared over the weekend. The ice cream shack was there first. She told me to say that, because she said, we're over here first. But it's fantastic, and if you're out enjoying the Prairie Trail, stop down there and visit, because they could use your support, and I think you'll really enjoy it.
Thank you. Summer is so great in Coeur d'Alene.
Well, just along that line, I am so excited to read about the food court coming down
On East Sherman?
Sherman, like 6 blocks from my office. That'll be terrific. So thanks whoever is doing that. So.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to approve the consent calendar as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk take the roll, please?
Wilkin.
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Wood.
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Miller.
Aye.
McEvers.
Yes.
In other business, we first have a resolution regarding an agreement with Garnet Adventures. Kelly Setters is coming forward, Deputy City Clerk, to help us better understand that. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. Just learned the password, so bear
What
with
is it?
me.
It's password.
Password.
No, we're strict here now.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you, Hillary. Appreciate it. Okay.
F5.
F5? Okay, sorry. Okay. So I'm here tonight to show you an application that came before my desk for Garnet Adventures. And Gary Cooper's the applicant, and he wants to do a pedal pub downtown Coeur d'Alene. So we'll first go over the tours and the route schedule. So the season would be June through October. There'd be 3 tours, Thursday through Sunday, and they're approximately 2.5, 3 hours. The max seating on the trolley would be 14, and all tours would begin and end at the Garnet Adventures on Lakeside Avenue near Sherman and 17th. The first tour of the day is at 11 o'clock in the morning, and it's for all ages. No alcohol would be served on this trip, the scenic trip that goes through, it does go through the Fort Crown area, and I'll get to that. So it stops at the Roosevelt Inn, was the first stop, then Sherman Avenue, and then by the carousel it stops again. It does go into the Fort Ground neighborhood through Garden and around, let's see, It goes through Garden and through Woodland Drive and then Military and back out through Fort Ground. And here's that map to show you where it goes. And that's what I was explaining there. And then the next tour, they have two of those. And one starts at 3 p.m. and the second one at 7. Guests must be over 21 because this one would serve alcohol. That the guests would bring their own sealed beer, seltzer, or wine for consumption on board of the bike. And the stops would include The Goat on 4th Street, 315 Cuisine on Wallace Avenue, and Seasons Restaurant on 3rd. And here's a map of that area that would be served. So, the action tonight request is the council should approve a letter of agreement with Gary Cooper, Garnet Adventures for commercial use of the city streets on recreational transit. And I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Questions? Yes, Amy?
Kelly, we had a similar business in town several years ago, I think before COVID.
Socially geared.
Socially geared. And their route was different. Can you explain the differences between the two routes?
Their route was longer down into the Fort Sherman area.
Okay.
So it would, let's see if I can. So this one, so here, it went all the way down here to Lakeshore Drive and around. So it's only taking one block of that Sherman or Fort Grounds area that would impact the neighbors in that area. So it goes from Garden down, around, and back out by the carousel. And that's the only difference that I know of, because I couldn't find any record of the actual map that laid it out where it went. I couldn't find the record.
Okay. And just to clarify, this is the route only at, I believe you said 11 a.m.
Yep.
That
There's
includes
one tour.
minors. So going through the Fort Grounds would not be the route with the alcohol consumption.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Kiki?
Kelly, I might have missed it. It seems to me with the previous one that we had here, one of the biggest issues was music and sound. Are there regulations about that, or have they brought up how that's going to occur during neighborhoods
not.
or hours or anything like that?
Gary is here, and he can answer to that if you choose.
And it may be inconsequential because I think that the other tours were going through neighborhood residences later in the day, and so, but I do know that the noise complaints seem to be what happened, and I just don't know how that would be addressed.
Okay. So maybe no music.
Oh, that would be boring, but.
Boring, okay.
I was on one of these once before, and they're actually, they were pretty, it's pretty fun to have a conversation, get some exercise, see a different way to tour and see sights, but I do know that it could be invasive to neighbors, and so I know that was one of the things that we should consider.
Okay.
Dan?
Well, I don't know how you would take this out, the ice cream truck that I can hear like 3 blocks away, and when it gets louder and louder, kind of like a fire truck. But at least I'd like to have in there that they can't just keep playing this 3 or 4 stanzas over and over and over. It's a small world or something. And but so anyway, but truly, I mean, they're noisy. We do that. This is kind of fun. Also, I think it was raised, which it sounds like this is already dealt with, but they wouldn't be unsupervised. I mean, they have a employee on there just like anything else. So anyway, okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Mr. Mayor,
you.
there is also an ordinance that talks about music being played on a vehicle that we already have, 5.24.010, which includes annoying to a person of reasonable sensitivities.
That'll including.
So that can be covered by that.
Mr. Mayor, Kelly, So I got a consensus from my neighborhood, because I live in the Fort Grounds, and they would be cutting through the neighborhood. So Woodland is an okay street. Then they're turning south on Military, which is a one-way street. And typically in the summer, you have lots of people who go the wrong way on a one-way street. There's also issues with parking. And then it turns left onto Sherman Court, which is a two-way street that's only 10 feet wide. So I would say that the consensus I got from my neighbors was that it would be better if it went down Hubbard and then turned on Lakeshore and then went down Park and not cut through the neighborhood. So I would like to see that change.
Okay.
Other questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Christie?
Kelly, when you brought this before General Services, we chatted a little bit about, many of the request is already in the ordinance. We already allow for this, so I am a little confused about why it's coming forward to council. Maybe it's because it's the unique, I don't know why it's coming to council.
Because the ordinance says that the pedal bike application has to come before you for a decision.
Gotcha, that would be a good reason.
Yes.
So we've done this, they have had a business like this in the past. And I would just like to say, I just got back from New Orleans. We took horse-drawn carriage rides. A lot of cities have those kind of things. I like to encourage people to have fun, but not ruin their neighbor's day. So if there is a good balance, I guess if you think the balance is changing the route a little bit and that makes everybody happy, I don't know how the pedal group feels about it. But I don't want to say no just to be a curmudgeon. I want people to be able to enjoy some of these activities. We live in a tourist town. People can see, I want to drive by all the cool houses, Dan, but whatever. We'll just go down Hubbard.
Did you get beads?
No. Anyway. But I just hope there's a happy medium. I'm always looking for a happy medium up here of how can everybody get a little bit of something and not just say no to everything. So that's my input.
Woody, so could we talk to the fellow who's got all the brains behind this besides you?
Sure.
Would you mind?
Gary?
I just had some detailed questions I'm trying to understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Mayor. Gary Cooper.
Gary, the goat, what is the goat?
That is one of the bars right behind the Moose on 4th.
It's very nice.
Okay. So I guess my question is, so the evening tours, I can bring a beer and pop it open and then pedal my butt to get to the goat. And then I leave my beer or I go in and get another beer?
You cannot leave the pedal pub with any alcoholic beverages, nor can you bring any onto from an establishment. You can initially board with BYOB your beverages that you bring, as long as they are only beer, wine, and seltzer.
Okay, so I go to the goat, I step in there, have a couple more beers because I got 20 to 30 minutes. Now I'm going to get back on the pedal thing and go to the cuisine, which is, what is that?
315 is a bar restaurant that's on Wallace.
Okay, same thing, 20, 30 minutes, so it's
Yes.
not really a eat thing?
Not really.
Kind of a couple of shots thing?
It's meant for you to go there and visit the establishment. We tried to pick places that we thought were unique places. They can also eat. It's given the time for them to do what they like at those establishments, but it's designed to be about a 20 to 30 minute stop.
Okay, sort of check it out. And then you're going to go to Seasons, which
Correct.
I know Seasons restaurant, liquor
bar
and stuff.
also.
So each stop you go in and have another drink. So now we're into about 3 drinks, 4 drinks. You're still okay. Now does that fall on you that these people might be a little, tipsy?
They will be signing a waiver that tells them they cannot be intoxicated and be on the pedal pub. So we're not going to allow people to remain on the pedal pub if they're highly intoxicated. It's a liability issue for us. We expect them to be able to pedal. It's a human-powered vehicle. We need them to be able to cooperate and to pedal to make the whole thing function.
You don't have a backup motor hidden somewhere, huh?
There is a backup motor, but that is really just meant to give you an assist on hills or to back from a tight location, but it's primarily human power.
So somebody asked about music and speech. Are you guys doing a tour guide thing? Or is there music in there and
Well,
information?
we envisioned that we would like the guests to be able to have a playlist of their own. So if it's like a bridal shower and they're going out on the ride, they could provide their own playlist and Bluetooth it over our sound system.
I think those are all my questions. Thank you.
Very welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Gary, we had Mr. Cook come who lives downtown. What's going to be the impact as far as downtown with the noise and all that?
So the music level, it was interesting to hear Mr. English talk about the ice cream truck, and I was thinking about the same thing because we're passing. We're not going to be stationary any place. And I wasn't aware that there was a music ordinance, but we certainly would comply with that. We don't want it to be excessively loud. It's not our intention to annoy neighbors. We, even our current business where we provide guided tours, one of our focuses is on the history of the community, the historical points. That's one of the reasons why we want to go over to Fort Sherman. We actually visit the 3 historical buildings that still remain within the Fort Sherman area. And I think they're unique to us and we like to share them.
And you're okay with not cutting through the neighborhood?
I am okay with any type of route change to get over there and back. It would be great, I think, to be able to drive through one part of the neighborhood, which is what I thought Garden would be nice on our scenic tour, just because it is such a unique neighborhood.
And that's a nice street. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, council, how do you wish to act on this issue?
Where are we?
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I will make a motion to approve resolution number 24047, which approval of a letter of agreement with Garnet Adventures LLC for commercial use of the city streets for recreational transit with the notes provided by council. I assume those are good.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk take the roll, please?
English.
Yes.
Wood.
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Miller.
Aye.
McEvers.
Yes.
Gookin.
Yeah.
Next, we're going to look at purchasing of a vac truck.
Good evening, Mayor.
Welcome, Glenn.
Tonight I have a presentation for you for the recommended approval of a new hydro excavation truck for the water department. Each year, our water department utility crew is tasked with the difficult areas of town where we have to maintain and repair our water infrastructure. And each year, it gets more and more difficult with the amount of utilities that go in the ground. Currently, we own this truck that we were acquired from wastewater in 2016. And it was an 11-year-old truck when we got it. We made modifications to make it a hydro excavation truck. They were using it as a sewer jetting truck where they would jet out sewer lines, so it had a massive hose reel on the front. We took that off and modified it and put some high pressure components on there so we could use it for hydro excavation. And hydro excavation basically is using high pressure water in a large vacuum system to be able to soft dig around utilities and remove material from the ground. The benefits of soft digging, it allows our crews to limit their time in the trench. It also safely expose pipes and utilities underground without risking damage to those utilities. We have minimal environmental impact to trees, tree roots. If we were to use a backhoe or an excavator to excavate around our utilities and a root was on the ground, we potentially could rip that out and cause much more damage to a neighboring tree that could be 10, 15 feet away rather than be able to excavate it with water and see it and be able to safely work around it. We can precision excavate around the utilities and it helps prevent any type of service interruption for our customers while we're doing this. Sometimes we can't foresee what's underground and how deep it is, and sometimes when we're using large equipment, there's not much forgiveness there. It also, the biggest thing that we are encountering is that we have to abide by state law. So we have to pothole utilities within 2 feet of that utility, within 2 feet of that mark of that utility, we were supposed to dig and then soft dig, hand dig over to that to expose it and safely dig around it. So the benefits of this truck are a great deal for us. As you can see, the amount of utilities in the ground, the rainbow of paint that we have to work around is becoming more and more. with the building that goes around town, and there's a few pictures of our guys working in the hole. This was up on Ironwood Place recently. And some of the mess that we get to work with. With the truck now being 17 years old, the maintenance costs and downtime that we're encountering are substantial. When we use this each day in the summertime, we're looking at almost a day of downtime to make repairs quite often. And some of those repairs we could through different companies, and this truck that I have here would be similar to the one that we would purchase. This one we feel like has best fit our needs in the demo process that we've taken it out, excavated on jobs. This truck plays a key role in digging for us. Almost daily we use this type of truck to expose and pothole utilities so we can safely not have downtime by damaging other utilities or our own utilities throughout the process of excavation. And without this type of truck, more and more we find that it would take 2 to 3 times longer, if not even more than that, to be able to have to hand dig. Most of you, I'm sure, have gardens at home. It's pretty easy to dig a foot down, but where our utilities are 5 feet down, it could take days to be able to excavate, especially in an emergency situation where we have lots of utilities around. With that, we would recommend council approval for the purchase of this Ramvac HX12 hydro excavation truck in the amount of $616,963.33 through the Source Well Purchasing Program. And I would stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Glenn. Do you inject water to soften the soil first and then do the vacuuming?
Kind of in a sense. I mean, if you can imagine a long digging wand, it's got a pressure nozzle on it and it rotates with high pressure, 2,000 PSI water. So we'll stick that down in the ground and get things loosened up initially. And then a lot of times it's just having our suction tube near where we need to be and then spraying an area to flow water and all that dirt and material into the suction tube.
So when you suck all that out, then do you bring something else for backfill?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
So we have this, a location where we can dump this material, let the water evaporate out of it, pull it out of the hole, let it dry out even further, then screen it, and so then we can make that rotation process by reusing the material.
Thank you. Questions? Christie?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Glenn, boy, these trucks are expensive.
They are very, very expensive.
Incredible. So what's the lifespan?
We expect this to last 15 to 20 years. These are a very, very high wear item truck. A sewer jet truck is mainly built to handle effluent and solids, and minimal solids. When we're excavating with rock and dirt and sand and clay and everything, it hits the metal and it really eats it away really quick. I mean, imagine a sandblaster day in and day out. So these newer trucks, they have a lot of plastic tubing for their suction tubes, which allows it not as much as a wear service, and they're not as expensive to replace.
Thank you.
You bet.
Woody?
Should I had it? How many of these repairs do you do in a year? Is this just repairs? You don't do original installations. You're the fix-it guys, right?
Correct.
How many of those?
Repairs to the truck or repairs
to the out there having to use the truck?
Typically, we schedule 100 replacement yardly services. I'm sure you've heard of our yardly services, been here a lot for those. Those are our biggest asset that is causing havoc for us. The pipe is failing on us. So we schedule 100 of those. Typically, we can counter anywhere from 20 to 25 leaks in those pipes. And then we have anywhere from 150 to 200 other services that we work on throughout the year, depending on the time of year and what.
Is this the same machine you use for flip-out changing meters? You're pretty consistent at that, right?
Correct. On occasion, usually in the older parts of town, we don't see as many utilities, so we can update meters in those areas. But as we get to the northern parts of town, there are lots and lots of utilities that we encounter behind the curb where our infrastructure is.
It's pretty cool that you guys modified it to work like that.
Yep. This truck's also nice because it has a heating unit on it to what allows us to use it throughout all elements. So we can use it throughout the winter if we need to.
Nice.
Seeing no further questions, how would council like to act on this
I'd like
issue?
to move to approve Resolution 24048, approval of this SWS Equipment LLC for a Ramvac truck-mounted hydro evacuator for the amount of $616,963.33.
Second.
Have a motion second for the discussion on the motion. Seeing none, will the clerk take the roll, please?
Wood,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Miller,
Aye.
McEvers,
Yes.
Gookin.
Yep.
English.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you, Glenn. Temporary moratorium.
Good evening. Let's see. Good evening, Mayor and council members. I am here before you on this request for a temporary moratorium. This temporary moratorium, if approved, would be a temporary moratorium on demolition and moving permits and building permits for significant exterior alterations for buildings excluding residential structures located within the downtown core zoning district, the downtown overlay north side zoning area, the downtown overlay east side zoning area, and buildings listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And if approved, it would be for 182 days from the date of approval. So I wanted to show you a couple of exhibits that were attached to this resolution that's in the council packet. The first is showing you the map boundaries that show you the three areas that we're talking about. So the first is the downtown core, and that is here in this brown color. The downtown north overlay is here in blue. Those two do overlap. And then the downtown east side overlay is in red. So that's just east of the downtown as well as slightly to the south. It also would apply to the properties on this list. This is not the full list of the National Register properties. There are some properties that are outside of the city limits that are not included in here. There's also the Fort Grounds neighborhood is a historic district that's not included. And if the Garden District, Historic District goes into place before this moratorium, if approved, goes into effect, that would also not apply. So again, just wanted to clarify it. It's really just for commercial properties that are on this list. These are significant properties that have been listed on the National Register. We don't have any protections in place, even though we have a historic code and they're on the National Register. Someone could come in and pull a demolition permit tomorrow and there would be nothing that would stop that from happening. So wanted to clarify some exclusions. So in addition to excluding residential structures, as I mentioned, and not including the neighborhood areas that are historic districts, it would exclude outbuildings. So if someone had a garage, that would be able to be demolished. It would exclude anything that's considered to be a dangerous building that would need to be demolished right away. It also would not apply to buildings that are younger than 50 years of age. So that's not considered historic structure. And it would not apply to anything that's an interior demolition. So if someone's doing a remodel of a business, a tenant improvement, that would not restrict that. And I already noted the historic districts would be excluded. So there are provisions in Idaho code that allow for moratoriums. So the two that are cited in this resolution are the section 67-6523 and 67-6524. And so this allows for the council, if you can find imminent peril to the public health, safety, or welfare, that you can do a temporary moratorium on a selected class of permits, and demolition permits qualify as a selected class. Idaho Code Section 67-4601 also recognizes the importance of historic, archaeological, and cultural heritage of the state and provides for a comprehensive program of historic preservation, including creating local historic districts and creating your own historic list at a local level. So wanted to provide a little bit of background that is in the resolution before you this evening for the justification and the reason why, in addition to what you heard this evening. So you heard our chairman, Walter Burns. He's the chairman of our city's Historic Preservation Commission, talk about this. You also heard John Swallow, who owns historic properties, talk about needing to put a pause on the demolition and things that are happening in the downtown area to help the commission and staff kind of catch up and get a handle on what's been going on and to respond to council's request to work on some of these important things, looking at the downtown core in terms of the zoning code and what's allowed by right and the design guidelines with that, as well as the downtown overlay north and downtown overlay east side. And so these are really important things for us, as well as we have a grant fund that came in from the state through the State Historic Preservation Office. It's allowing us to do a reconnaissance survey of the downtown buildings. We've been awarded that. We don't have the funds yet. We have to start that effort, and so we're just trying to play a little bit of catch-up to allow us to do the work that's been directed and help us evaluate what is in downtown and determine how we can move forward in the best way possible. As noted, demolition permits have no review currently. Right now, we are doing a courtesy review on some historic properties within the city, but that doesn't hold any weight. It's not in our code, so we're just asking for a notification about demolition permits, but this would actually put a pause for the 180 days to allow no demolition permits as noted, so that we can protect the historic structures while they're being evaluated. We have historic properties that are at risk, so you've heard about the Roosevelt School, which is a Roosevelt Inn. We're hopeful that there's a buyer that will preserve that, but there's no guarantee at this point, again, because we have nothing in our local code, and we are working with the buyer to implement a historic facade easement that would protect the building, but that's, again, not in place. And so properties like that are at risk. In response to the threat of the loss of that structure, there's been an online petition to save the Roosevelt, and there's over 5,000, or sorry, I don't have the right number. I will catch the number for you. 5,446 signatures have been obtained to date. So in the resolution, it said 5,300. So we have close to 5,500 signatures to date to save that. So you've been hearing public outcry about saving historic properties. We also, as Chairman Burns noted, the Historic Preservation Commission was formed. We also had the Historic Preservation Code adopted, and we became a certified local government all within 2019. The City Council also then adopted a Historic Preservation Plan, and within that plan, it notes how important the downtown is, that these are some of our earliest buildings. This is our history. This is remnants of Fort Sherman and the original grid pattern of the downtown, so there's a lot of significance, as well as noting the threat. So there was a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat analysis done as part of that historic preservation plan, and the threat to the downtown structures was noted as a big concern. So as noted, we have formed a working group, and Councilmember Gookin is on that. We are evaluating the zoning districts, so what's allowed by right in the downtown core, as well as these two infill districts I noted, the downtown north and downtown east. And so we're working forward and getting something back to council, and so that's critical timeline. We also have the grant money, as I mentioned, and then just for context, other communities in Idaho have done this before, so Coeur d'Alene would not be the first. And then the other thing that's important for council to consider is you kind of have to determine what is the imminent risk, what's the peril, what's the public health, safety, and welfare. And so we've been hearing from community members such as Deb Mitchell, who spoke earlier, on the mental health aspect of losing what's important about our community. And there are medical terms that are listed here and included in this moratorium resolution, the root shock and the solastalgia. And a lot of that is just the loss of place. So you lose your community when, if you could imagine a whole downtown block of historic properties was demolished, you don't recognize it anymore, and so you lose your sense of place. And so for some people that triggers mental health response, and so grief, loss of belonging, displacement, isolation, and alienation are some of those responses. And so there is proof of that through some of these articles. They are listed on the city's website, but I wanted to bring that forward for your consideration. So the recommendation before you is to adopt this temporary moratorium for 182 days that would be in effect immediately as if council were to approve this evening. So with that, I would stand for questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, council has the ability, if you said, we like this, but we want to apply it to residential structures, you could, but the recommendation is not to include.
And then the Roosevelt, I'm trying to think of what stirred the pot on this. I mean, you guys have been at this for 5 years. You've had this historic, this wasn't even in the kind of the preview until the Roosevelt fired up. Is that what sort of triggered it?
That triggered this response from community members to say, we want to do something, can we do this moratorium, just to kind of put a pause on things. We've been working toward some of these priorities and looking at the existing development standards and design guidelines and working toward the implementation.
So the goal is to come up with, you said 50 years old, so anything older than 50 you could say, no, you can't tear it down.
Correct.
But if it was mine, I owned it, I paid taxes on it, And you're saying, sorry, Wood, you can't tear it down.
And again, this is just temporary. This is 182 days, so this isn't a long-term goal. This is really just to help the commission work with staff and work with the working group to develop some things to bring forward for council.
So I would have to wait 6 months to not be able to, and then theoretically in between the time you bring it forward and I could take it down when there's that window of opportunity?
Correct.
Okay. I'm having a hard time with that part of it, is that, wait, it's my property. Okay. I get where you're coming from. I appreciate the history and stuff. It just seems kind of a big stick when Dr. Wood's place is gone and the Roosevelt's still standing, you know? Thank you.
Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hillary, why were residential buildings excluded?
The thought was just the number of residential buildings and the thought that city council and some of the residents might be more concerned if it was limiting residential because there's a lot more happening with residential permits than commercial. And so especially with the downtown core and kind of looking at the zoning code with development standards and the design guidelines, the majority of those are commercial. And so kind of looking at the nature of that. And then with the other areas, it is a majority of residential, but just the palpability of it.
So we could add them. There's nothing legal.
You can add it. There's nothing legal. That is correct.
It was interesting that you put a picture of the Desert Inn up there because that burned down. And if someone's home burned down,
right,
could they rebuild on it given this moratorium?
Yes.
Okay. Also, a question for Randy. What's a day?
I believe it's defined as 24 hours.
But legally? So 182 days, that's 182 sequential days, business days?
Sequential days.
Sequential days, okay, thank you. You know, thank you.
I see no further questions, or yes, Kiki?
Hillary, just one thing, and I'm not sure if you explained this. The moratorium is for 182 days for a chance to build some of these programs and say what it's going to look like. We will come up with a plan for demolition permits. They're not going to go away for forever. And in that time, we have the ability to build awareness for any residents that are out there that have a potential historic home. And the idea is to be able to get ideas in front of them to help preserve that and have them understand how important it is. Maybe saving Dr. Wood's house had there been something in place where there were people to talk with him about that. But it's just really buying the time to put a pause on identifying what happens and then moving that forward. So I think that there was the tear down question. I got a lot of questions about that, but I do appreciate all the work that the Historic Preservation Commission did. There's some really talented professionals on that group, and they were very, very prudent in trying to make sure this was fair and could come forward and have a real positive outcome. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Okay.
With that, I could make a motion
Okay.
to approve resolution number 24049 of a temporary moratorium on demolition and moving permits and building permits for significant exterior alterations for buildings excluding residential located in the downtown core zoning district and downtown overlay, north side and downtown overlay east side district, and buildings listed on the National Historic Registry.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Discussion on the motion. Dan?
Mr. Mayor, I'm just curious if anyone on council is interested in adding residential to that list. What's your thoughts, Kiki?
I'd like to talk about that. When we first talked about this, did not have a problem with residential being included. I left it up to the commission, and I think they were concerned about that time frame of, how long and who would that affect, and with no information about who out there might be in the middle of trying to do something that this could cause a hiccup for. If it was up to me alone, I'd probably leave residential in here for that 182-day period of time. But I trust the commission and the body as a whole.
The other side of the coin on that is that there are 50-year-old homes that are 50 years old, but not necessarily of historical significance. And if somebody wanted to come in and put a new home in its place, they're stuck for 180 days, plus whatever comes out of the redeveloped ordinance. So I have a concern about putting residential in there for that reason.
And I would add too that I believe, maybe on the commission, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, they had a discussion about could we identify some of the more significant older historic homes and add them to the list. But I think that the result of that was that it would be too time-consuming and arbitrary to get through. So, so I was leaning more towards let's go with the districts that we have, because that's where most of those stately old mansions are, and try to just, leave the residential in there. But I trust that this gives us at least a hope at some preservation. And I hope those folks with those places reach out to the commission with some ideas and help and ways that maybe they can preserve that and understand how important those are to everyone.
Further discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk take the roll, please?
Evans.
Yes.
Miller.
Aye.
McEvers.
No.
Gookin.
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Wood.
Yes.
Motion carries. Declaration of emergency for purchasing purposes. Chief White, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Well, about 9 days ago, I received a call just before 5 a.m. saying that our IT building was on fire. I arrived, I'll show you a photograph real quick of what I arrived to just after 5 a.m. that day. And the fire took about 3.5 hours to get put out by our fire department, and the great job they did trying to put that thing out. Since that time, our fire investigators, they started the fire investigation that day. Later that day, the state fire marshal showed up, and then the state fire marshal has taken over charge of the investigation of the fire along with the ATF. Just earlier today, the results of the investigation were announced, so this slide is slightly different than what you have in your packet to reflect that. It was determined that the cause of the fire was a lithium-ion battery in one of our e-bikes. Once again, there's a photograph of our building up in flames, and this is what it looks like today.
Ouch.
The emergency declaration I'm seeking tonight is not a request for additional funding at this time. All it is requesting that we forego some of the current city purchasing requirements in terms of our policies. So if and when we're able to replace some of these items, we don't have to go through some of the cumbersome processes that are currently outlined within our city rules. For instance, if I were to receive approval from ICRIM to replace, I'm just going to make some numbers up right now. Let's say I had to replace a dozen of the radios that were lost in the fire to the tune of $7,000 each. That would require a significant process that we go through before we can replace those very much needed items by our code enforcement officers or animal control officers, the police officers who were stationed in that building and that sort of thing. So really that's all this is. I'm not asking to go on a spending spree or requesting additional funding from council. We're just asking that the city declare an emergency because of the catastrophic fire so we can circumvent some of those lengthy processes. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Questions? Christie?
Thank you. Chief, some of the questions that have come before me, I know the answer, but I'm going to have you say it anyway. There's some confusion at whether we're applying for federal funds.
No, we're not.
Thank you. And again, I think you said it well. We're just talking about streamlining a process because it is an emergency situation. We have to replace some of this very critical equipment. So I would think that anyone could understand that cares about their public safety, that we would move forward with this. Thank you.
And honestly, the funding discussions will probably take place at a later date, once we determine the amount that ICRIP will cover, and then the necessity to replace some of the items that were lost.
And ICRIP, just for the public's knowledge, is our insurance company.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, Kiki.
Chief White, it's early on, I get it. Do you have kind of a priority strategic plan in what equipment you're going to replace first? And I guess my question is seated in, if ICRIP is unable to cover the entire cost of full replacement, will you get what you need that way first, or how's that going to work?
I don't know if I can fully answer your question with regards to planning out. We are currently in the process of just identifying everything that was lost. We lost basically everything associated with our K-9 unit, all of our specialty units, including SWAT equipment, our bicycle teams, our motorcycle teams, our UTVs that we use down here in the park, along with all of our pedal bicycles, our entire IT department. The scope of this is huge. In terms of what we're looking to replace quickly, it's those items that we have to get those units back up and functioning as quickly as possible. So computers that they can use to help complete their jobs, radios that they'll need to contact dispatch, and things of that nature. And of course, our IT division had to replace some things that were lost in the fire. So for instance, our backup computer recording stuff. So if there were an incident somewhere else, we still have the ability to meet our public records obligations and things of that nature.
That was my other question.
Insofar as the rest of it, though, it'll take some time for us to sit down and figure out exactly what was lost and will be replaced, and then how we need to go about replacing those items and what the priority will be in each of those. I will tell you that right now, working with other city departments and city IT, they've been fantastic in trying to get our folks back as close as they can to being able to be functional. For instance, our code enforcement doesn't have vehicles. So we're scrambling, trying to get them some wheels that they can drive around to complete their duties every day. Working with streets and administration and IT, and of course our wonderful IT folks, we've been able to get some temporary workspaces for some of our folks to be able to conduct some of the activities that they were previously doing in those buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Chief, this is an assumption, but why wasn't the building sprinkled?
Back in 2016, when the building was constructed through the use of GEO funds, it wasn't a requirement in code, since it was predominantly a storage building with only a small area for office space. It was determined that two things. Number one, we didn't have the funding for the extra, I believe it was $15,000 for sprinklers at that time. And number two, it wasn't required in code. It was recommended that we put it in there, and ultimately we couldn't afford it, so it was pulled out.
Seems like kind of penny wise and pound foolish now to $15,000 for sprinklers versus how many millions of dollars is this going to cost us?
I agree with you
When
wholeheartedly.
we rebuild it, will we sprinkle it?
That would be our recommendation, just
Thank
like it
you.
was last time.
Doesn't say that it
Christie?
just buys
I
it
had
in
one
time.
more question, and I believe that was your recommendation last time. How are you doing your inventory? How are you working with ICRIP? How are you figuring out what was lost? Who's assigned to that?
Lieutenant Tilson has been heading this for our department, and I would tell you he's doing a phenomenal job. If I had to, I probably couldn't pick a more meticulous, qualified person to conduct this whole process. This is everything from grabbing invoices out of Springbrook and looking through that information. I would tell you, so one of the things we lost was a brand-new police car that literally had not hit the street yet. IT had to put just a couple finishing touches on it, and they had fewer than 70 miles on the odometer just from being moved around. And we had literally just received it. And so we have the inventory of everything that was put into the car, all the labor associated with adding all those items, the cost of the vehicle, and going back through our records, kind of using that as a template, we were able to get that for the majority of the patrol cars and other marked vehicles that were lost. Some of it, once again, was just scouring through databases and trying to find old receipts from things. Luckily, they weren't kept in that building, to try to determine exactly what was in there. Some of it, though, we had to go and inventory all of our department members to make sure that what we think was lost was actually lost, so we don't report something as being missing when it really wasn't lost in the fire entirely. So it's been quite a process. I'm extremely satisfied with not only the speed with which this is happening, but the accuracy. The database that's being built to date is huge. I don't even know how many items on there, but we separated in different categories. We had the building, the things that were attached to the building, the stuff that was in the building, each of the vehicles, and then the stuff that was in each of the vehicles, and then things that were attached to the vehicles that we added afterwards, like lights and radios and computers. And so, as you can imagine, that list is huge. Just in individual items, so for instance, one of those categories, the stuff that was in the building already totals over $700,000. That isn't including the vehicles or the things that were in the vehicles or the things that were attached to the building. This is just stuff that was in the building.
Well, and this is the first time we've talked publicly about the fire, so I just wanted to, I know all the other departments in the city are coming together and trying to get you equipment to make you somewhat functioning again. I understand the fire department gave you a bunch of old chairs for you to sit on if you need to. And so, that's the kind of cooperative spirit that you can expect from city departments, and it's nice.
City team's been great.
Woody?
I just had a really strange question for you, Chief. Have you ever been through anything quite like this?
No, sir.
Close?
No, we've had cars burn down before, catch fire out there on the streets, or they were in a wreck and catch fire, but not whole buildings.
Pretty interesting. Probably write a book, huh? Thank you.
I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'd make a motion to approve resolution, excuse me, I'm going to get to the right one. Dispense with the rule.
There you go.
Thank you. Why are you saying that?
No, there's no dispensing of the
Somebody
rule.
else want to make a motion?
This-
Here we go. There's no dispense of the rule there, Dan.
I'll make a
It's not an
motion
ordinance, it's a
to
resolution.
dispense
No,
with.
there's no dispense of the rule that I can see.
It's on here.
Where do you see
That's
that?
the next one.
Right here. Oh.
No, that's the next one. Okay,
Okay,
I'm going to start
I got
over.
ahead. Okay.
All right. I'll make-
Number 4.
Thank you. I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 24-050, approval of a declaration of emergency pursuant to Idaho Code 672808, Section 1, as a result of extraordinary, which demands the immediate expenditure of public money in the public interest and necessity without compliance with formal bidding procedures.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, and probably after extraordinary, put the word event.
I thought about throwing that in.
Annex.
Further discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk take the roll, please?
Miller,
Aye.
McEvers,
Yes.
Gookin,
Yep.
English,
Yes.
Wood,
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Next, we have a proposal for some amendments to our municipal code regarding security agent license. Chief White, you're still up.
Thank you, sir. The proposal in front of you tonight is to amend a code that was last looked at in 2009. The majority of the amendments that I'm proposing tonight deal with helping the public reduce instances of misidentification. And I must tell you that we're not in search of a problem. This is a problem that has we've been dealing with in our area and regionally for some time. We've had problems with security personnel acting as if they're in law enforcement or being confused with law enforcement on several occasions within the last year in our city. Locally, there's been a few instances of misidentification and instances of inappropriate actions on the part of security personnel. One company's been involved in investigations regarding impersonating a peace officer in another state and indicted in another state for actions taken while conducting security services. Once again, the only real reason I'm requesting these changes, though, is just to help the public identify who is a security guard and who is a peace officer. There's one company in particular that looks so similar to a sheriff's deputy that one of our patrol officers, during their encounter, asked that individual for a supplemental report, thinking that they were a sheriff's deputy. We support our security companies, want to help them be successful, but I also have an obligation to the public to make sure that when they think they're contacting a law enforcement representative, that they are in fact contacting someone who's in law enforcement, not a private security person. I've spoken with leadership from the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. They support this proposed change. The security companies' uniforms look very similar to theirs, are problematic for our sheriff's departments as well. Additionally, this evening I heard from a member of our community who currently works with people who suffer from mental disability, and she was concerned that people might misidentify some security guards as law enforcement personnel. I think it's important that I address some of the comments that were made this evening during the public comment portion, and so I need to take just a few minutes and talk about that. The only changes, once again, that we're referring to are the ones that were in red in your packet. There was a bunch of comments pertaining to laws that prohibit arrest. There is no changes being recommended to that at all, and Idaho code is pretty clear on that matter. There's nothing that would prohibit them from acting as any other private citizen and making a citizen's arrest. There was some information talked about with regards to logos and the word security. Our current ordinance, the one from 2009, requires that all the vehicles have the word security agent written on the vehicles. There is not a single security company around that has the word security agent on their vehicles. So I thought we should remove the word agent to make it easier for the security companies to comply. With regards to having the word security be bold and legible from some distance, the common standard out there is the one that I've written in the ordinance, that the letters should be 4 inches tall, and I don't think that's a high bar to ask for. There is a lot of vehicles that are in our area currently that say things regarding patrol but don't have the word security on them legibly from any distance at all, and that's a problem for us. There was a comment regarding the comment period and the amount of time that the individual security companies may have been aware that this was being looked at. This whole process started back in February. There was emails exchanged with the companies, and I don't think it was February, it might have been March, I think, when Kelly started sending the information out with the proposed ordinances to those companies, that we are looking at this and requesting input and things of that nature. And that's it. So in summary, I'm requesting the council approve the proposed amendments to municipal code pertaining to security agencies.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I have a question for Chief White. Some of the public comments mentioned Section 6 and keeping copies of the contract readily available. I'm looking at Section 6 here, and I'm seeing some minimal changes. Our copy happens to be blue. The changes are red, as you mentioned, but where place of residence has been struck out and just address left, adding date of birth, and then striking complete and accurate description and history on record of each person.
Yes, ma'am.
So
the reason that is currently in code is so if someone is purporting themselves to be a security officer, we have the ability to look at the database that municipal security holds that has licenses for each of the individual security officers to make sure that person is duly licensed in the city.
Thank you.
And once again, the only change there is removing place of residence, removing complete and accurate description and history of record, and then adding date of birth.
I think it was misspoken. The contract language is at the end of Section 5.
Oh, thank you. Yep.
Mr. Mayor, if Amy's done.
I am, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Christie.
Thank you, Chief. Well, I'm glad this is coming forward. I do think it's a concern. And, some of the public comment I found pretty incredible. We're not the Wild West. We do have a professional law enforcement agency. We do have city ordinances, city codes, and we expect security companies to comply with those. The whole idea that a private security guard could walk around with a badge and a uniform that the public could confuse for law enforcement is quite frightening. It ought to be frightening for everyone. We need to rely on professional law enforcement when you're in a crisis. Now, certainly, private security companies have their role, and they do a lot of good for private industry, and I'm sure there's many times where they assist law enforcement, but they're not the premier law enforcement in the city. The Coeur d'Alene Police Department is. So I don't have any concerns with the ordinance changes. I think they're reasonable and necessary, and I'll be supporting them.
Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, you mentioned some instances where people had confused security with law enforcement, and could you give some specific examples of that?
Sure. There was one instance where there was a security company that was performing some work in the downtown area, and then something occurred in close proximity to that, but not where these individuals were hired to be guarding, or the structures, or what do you call it, the stuff that they were supposed to be guarding occurred. Law enforcement was summoned later on, and we were told that there was a person in the bar that the bar wanted to be arrested for trespassing. That was not the case at all. The case, once again, since there was a little investigation and then a misspeaking, I guess I would say. In fact, the bar just wanted the person trespassed, not arrested for trespassing, just trespassed. The other instances that occurred over in Washington and California, I don't know if I really want to go into those. There was another instance, well, maybe that's all I should say without, I really don't want to talk bad about an individual agency, and so
Cool.
I prefer to be a little more generic.
And was there ever an opportunity to meet with these agencies? We heard from two of them tonight.
Yes, I met with representatives from both Lear and Gates and Northern States. I received some comments from Northern States that were written to us earlier today. He says, I'm aware of this and spoken with Chief White earlier this spring. Northern States fully supports Chief White and the city of Coeur d'Alene in compliance with whatever changes are implemented. I met with the folks from both Lear and Gates and earlier this spring and spoke with them.
Doesn't seem to match up with what he said earlier. Isn't it illegal already to impersonate a peace officer?
It is.
So where do you draw the line?
The actions, not necessarily the way they look or how they look. So if they were to take law enforcement actions and purport themselves to be law enforcement, or a reasonable person would think them to be law enforcement based on their actions, then they could be arrested for impersonating a peace officer. So merely being present and asking questions or something like that may not give someone the impression that they're a peace officer. But let's say they were to use their vehicle to pull somebody over, or somebody pulled over thinking that they were law enforcement behind them, and then they took some sort of an action that a reasonable person would think would be conducted by law enforcement, that might be impersonating a peace officer.
But they can't, but if I understand the regulations, they can't put those kind of lights on their car. Right.
I don't
And they
think this has, I don't remember in code there being a lot of verbiage regarding lights, just merely the markings of them saying security.
Okay.
There is
There is
state
an Idaho
law.
code or something separate.
Okay. And I'm looking at section 4, which talks about the uniforms clearly marked with security, and I see the point of this, which is to not confuse that with a law enforcement officer. Would this also apply to strippers?
What?
What did you say?
You invite someone to your bachelorette party and they're dressed like a cop. I mean, would that apply here?
Well, only if they're seeking to get a license in the city to perform security agent functions, and then they're
It came
performing that work of a security guard, then I guess.
Right.
Wasn't prepared for
Let's,
that
move
question.
along
Thank you.
here. Kiki, you have a question?
I think Woody was before me, so.
I have a quick one. So would this apply to the sheriff in Post Falls and Rathdrum? Is this universal, or is it just us?
Well, this is just a city ordinance. The issues that we've had recently have been with individual agencies that look remarkably close to the sheriff's department. As I said, when I spoke to the undersheriff a couple times about this, they don't like the idea that they might be confused for these individuals either. I would tell you there's at least one running around that looks almost identical to a Bonner County vehicle. And as you know, Bonner County does come down here sometimes to, transport prisoners or attend court or things of that nature, or attend training at our building, for instance.
Okay, thank you.
Vicki?
Just two things. Are there a lot more security agencies like this than there used to be in Coeur d'Alene? Are these
No,
relatively
currently,
new?
there's really only, there's 14 that are in our city database that are licensed to perform security type activities. There's one Allied Universal that has not yet started doing uniform security stuff in our area. I spoke with their head representative, and she indicated they have zero problems with this whatsoever. It meets what they currently have in other states and what they currently use. The other ones that spoke this evening, I met with both of them. One of those has conducted security type activities, uniform security activities in our area previously. And then, of course, I spoke about Northern States, who does it on a very regular basis in our city.
Okay. And then the only other question I had is regarding, there was an assertion about that this Section 5 violates Idaho Statute 19-604 regarding citizens' arrests. I spoke with Randy about that, and can you two address that
Randy, sounds like you already addressed it. You want to hit it?
again?
It's actually 19-614, which talks about citizens' arrests. Section 5 doesn't even use the word arrest. It is a section that is intended to require notification of police when a security agent is aware of a crime. Has nothing to do with whether they can perform a citizen's arrest or not.
Okay, I'm just reading. It says must expressly authority a citizen's arrest, which looks like it might have meant to say must expressly authorize a citizen's arrest.
That's what it says.
I'm looking at the changed word section.
Yeah, if they're doing it on behalf of a third party. Obviously, anyone can perform a citizen's arrest, but if a security agent is trying to act on behalf of a third party and perform a citizen's arrest of somebody, that's a different situation.
So that's what this is clarifying, is that a copy of the contract providing their authority on behalf of the third party has to be on the person, the agent.
That's how it reads.
Okay.
So the reason for that section of code is if I'm a security guard guarding your house, I technically don't have the authority to, say, arrest somebody for trespassing on your property unless you give me permission to do so. That'd be like you wanting to arrest somebody for going into your neighbor's house. Just, you know what I mean? There needs to be some sort of an agreement there for a private company to act on your behalf.
Makes sense, but to be just clarifying that it does not violate any Idaho statutes.
Correct.
As a matter of fact, Idaho code that Randy's referring to requires that the person take the person to be arrested before a magistrate or deliver him to a peace officer.
Woody, you have another question?
Well, actually, I had a moment. Does anybody, well, from the 70s, back in the 70s, there was one security guy in town, Pineapple?
Pineapple.
In those days, he walked the alleys and checked your doors, and if they were open, he'd go in and make sure you're good and close it. I think I was working at the Iron Horse at those days, and
He's a good guy.
he would come in and worked all night, jovial guy, right?
Yep.
All right, we've come a long way. Some historical stuff. Danny remembers them. I'm done, thanks. I thought we'd try and
Thank
leave
you.
on a positive note here.
How about a motion?
I make a motion to dispense with the rule and read Council Bill number 24-1008 once by title only.
Second.
We're okay.
Oh, that's right, yeah, okay. Clerk, take the roll, please.
Yes.
Gookin.
Yep.
English.
Yes.
Wood.
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Miller.
Aye.
Motion carries. Would the clerk read the title, please?
Council Bill Number 24-1008, an ordinance providing for the amendment of the following sections of the Coeur d'Alene Municipal Code: 53210, 53220, 53250, 53260, 53280, and 53290, pertaining to security agencies and agents, providing for the repeal of conflicting ordinances, providing for severability, providing for the publication of a summary of the ordinance, and providing for an effective date thereof.
Motion?
I guess it's back to me. It's on 2 pages. Okay, a motion to adopt Council Bill 24-1008.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion on the motion. Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I feel this is a lot of overreach, a lot of too much government here. We're getting into the nitty-gritties on what we can tell someone to wear in his uniform. I understand the chief's concern, and I think it's valid. I also think it's specific to a certain company. If you're going to hire a security guard, it's kind of your choice how they're going to be dressed. You could dress them in a tuxedo if you wanted to, or you could have them just look like a member of the crowd. But I think if someone wanted to say, I want you to look more law enforcement-y, that's kind of a personal preference for someone, and they could do that if they wanted to. I don't think that's impersonating a police officer. And I think our existing rules are fine as far as, the one gentleman mentioned that he may have to do livery for all the fleet, which seems to be an excessive expense that we would be imposing upon these private businesses. I would like to see that we're more business-friendly. But I understand everyone's concern. It's just, this to me seems like a little bit too much government. So I will be opposing it. Thank you.
Yes, Christie?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We don't always agree, right?
No.
Mr. Mayor, much of this code language has been in place for a couple of decades or more. And I would just like to point out that just because it says chief of police, that's the way the code reads. This wasn't crafted in particular by Lee White. We rely on him for input and real-time observation about what's happening and how it's impacting the public. This is an impact on working law enforcement. It is not safe to have other agencies running around that are not certified professional law enforcement that look like law enforcement. That's a concern. So I think that it's been carefully crafted to make sure that they're still successful with their businesses, but it also meets the needs of area law enforcement. I'll be supporting it.
Seeing no further discussion, will the clerk take the roll, please?
McEvers.
Yes.
Gookin.
No.
English.
Yes.
Wood.
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Miller.
Aye.
Motion carries. And sole source purchasing, Chief.
This item's a bit of an odd one. We applied for and awarded a grant for a mobile ALPR. It's an automated license plate reader and speed trailer sometime back. When you were at a town, sir, Mayor Pro Tem Woody McEvers signed the grant award. And the way the grant works is county OEM actually purchases the equipment. But since we are the entity that's going to be controlling and actually acquiring this piece of equipment, it needs to comply with our purchasing rules. Now, since our purchasing rules require this, and this was before we put the earlier emergency declaration in, we thought we'd continue with this. Since we're requesting to use a specific company, because it's compatible with our existing systems where others are not, we're requesting a sole source for this purchase. We've discussed moving to a different camera system and a different back-end system, computer system that controls all this, but this time it's cost prohibitive. This would be a regional asset. This would be one of 2 mobile trailers. I take that back. One might have burnt up in the fire. This might be our only mobile ALPR trailer. And actually, I don't think the other one burnt all the way, but it was close enough. It might have got some pretty good damage. I don't know if that's been quite determined yet. Once again, this is a regional asset. This is one of 11 cameras that we have in our area. 4 of those are in the city, the rest of them are all out in the county in various places. And in short, this does not affect the city financially in any way. There's no city funds that go towards this purchase. This is just a declaration of sole source, so OEM can purchase the piece of equipment on our behalf consistent with our purchasing rules.
Stan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Chief, this is not a speed camera,
It does both. It does speed and it also reads license plates.
but we're not giving tickets to someone who's going fast.
No,
based
it's
on
just,
that.
it's a speed feedback, so it's just the flashy thing that says, you're doing 27 and a 25.
But it still reads their license plate number.
It does.
Why?
Yes. So we can tell if there's stolen vehicles or missing
Okay.
people or murder suspects or that sort of thing traveling through.
Okay, but this isn't down that path to giving out tickets because there's a robot there, not a person.
No, no, no.
Okay.
That's illegal in the state of Idaho.
All right, just
There's no
checking.
sort of photo enforcement that's legal in Idaho.
Okay, good, thank you.
Woody?
So, help me here. So, you just said cameras, and then you said trailer. So, trailers are,
It's a trailer with the speed feedback thing on there that also has a camera on it.
okay. You said there's cameras around, which is the same thing.
Well, they're not mobile, but yes, those are all
Okay,
fixed
this
sites.
one can move around?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha, sorry. Reading in between the
So
lines.
the predominantly we use this so we get a complaint that, hey, people are speeding way too fast on, I'm gonna pick a road, on Sherman, in our neck, down on East Sherman. So we deploy the cameras, a speed feedback thing to help people slow down in the short term. But at the same time, if a stolen vehicle happens to go by, or there's a murder suspect from Washington that's passing through or something of that nature, then we'll be alerted.
Okay, thank you.
Christie?
Mr. Mayor, just a comment that when I was still working at the police department, this piece of equipment was probably the most requested piece of equipment from all the block watches all over town, because there are speeding concerns in neighborhoods, and this does slow people down when they can see that immediate feedback of their speed. And I'm happy to make a motion unless there's more. Okay.
Go.
All right. I make a motion to approve resolution number 24051, approval of a sole source purchase of the ALPR trailer using grant funds from a state Homeland Security Program grant subawarded by Kootenai County and administered by the Office of Emergency Management in the amount of $68,715.
Second.
You have a motion, a second. Discussion on the motion. Clerk, take the roll, please.
Gookin,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Wood,
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Miller,
Aye.
McEvers.
Yes.
Motion carries. Next item on the agenda has to do with billboards.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
If I may just state for the record that my husband works for a sign company. However, he is not in a position whatsoever to determine where a billboard goes or the relocation or anything. He has nothing, that's nothing to do with his job. So I do not have a conflict of interest.
Okay. Hillary?
All right, well, good evening once again. So I'm here before you presenting a sign code update as requested by council at the December 19th, 2023 meeting. So staff at that time had asked, council had asked at that time for staff to provide an opportunity for council to revisit amendments to the sign code and provide ways to allow for the movement of existing billboards within city limits. Before I kind of get into all the slides, just wanted to point out, so I've done presentations along with other team members at both General Services, Public Works, so I'm not going to go into the same level of detail on the first part of the slides. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask that. So constitutionality was a big issue when we made our last amendments to the sign code, so we changed that so that we're not regulating content. One of the things that's very important for us looking at any amendments to the sign code is why we have the sign code, and so looking at the purpose, and it is really looking at that they cannot obstruct views, distract motorists, displace alternative uses for land, and affect the aesthetics of a community. And then there are a number of findings that council made. They find and declare it is necessary to regulate the construction, erection, maintenance, electrification, illumination, type, size, number, and location of signs, and looking at things such as the health, safety, welfare, the orderly appearance of the city, informational needs, protecting scenic beauty, etc. So in 2022, the sign code amendments that were brought before you. We removed a lot of things. We condensed it greatly. We had some changes that were made actually at the meeting directed by City Council, and one of those was to to remove this language that says billboards may not be moved to a different location, and that was in the context of billboards may not be enlarged, structurally altered, or moved to a different location. So that had caused some confusion, and that is our understanding of why Lamar brought forward the request to City Council asking us to change this, because they were under the impression that billboards could be moved within the city, although there is a section of the code that still says they must remain in place. These other things were also removed at the time. So billboards that used to be brought in with an annexation had to be moved within 60 days. That was removed, and then if there was any damage over 50%. So I'm going to let Kelly come up and present a few slides, kind of explaining how the on-premise sign code works, and then I'll come back up.
Okay. So when a sign code comes to me for review, I do a calculation from our freestanding and sign allowance sheets. So how I calculate that is I take the frontage, the longest frontage of the parcel, and I times that by 3, and that gives me the 375 square feet on this example. And that's their total that they can use for all signage is. And then I break it down on this freestanding allowance calculation. So you would take that 225 and do the driving lane factor, which is down here, 1.75, times that by 0.25, which is the density factor, which gives them 98 plus the 32 sign area factor. So the total comes out to 130 is their total signage allowance for that parcel. So in the C17 zone, the max is only 100. So they could have a 30-foot freestanding sign 100 feet away, which none of them do that because it would be ridiculous because it's too small. So to show you what this site has here, it's a tiny little 36 square foot sign and this little 45 square foot wall sign, and they've barely used any of their allowance that they were allowed, because they could have put them all over this building. And this sign is located right off I-90 there at Lee Court, which all of you have probably seen this sign. This sign is a on-premise sign, so it is not considered a billboard sign. So if it was damaged or anything, they wanted to do improvements, they would have to come into compliance with the current code, which is 160 square feet maximum and only 50 feet tall. And that's the requirement for I-90. So that was that. Did you have any questions about that? The sign allowance, do you understand it?
I see none.
Okay, okay. I'll bring Hillary back up.
Thank you. All right, so once again, we're here before you because of council's request to come back with this. As mentioned before, we have presented to both of the subcommittees, the General Services, Public Works. We've also met with Lamar and Yesco and have sent the proposed code amendments out to the other sign companies as well within the community. So current code, this is the language that exists now for billboards. When we made the change a few years ago, we removed a lot of that language. And so in looking at how does this work with the code moving forward to allow billboards to relocate, we realized a lot was missing. And so I heard, some mention that maybe there's too many pages, but we're really building back in kind of the structure and looking at other communities within the state of Idaho, Spokane Valley, City of Spokane, as well as other states, just to see best practices on how they have defined billboards and other performance standards for them. So this is current code. Previous code was more specific in terms of the billboards as well as where they are located. And so this was language that was in there prior to the 2022 amendments. And this is kind of the big part in here, in addition to the other things we already mentioned about if annexation had to be removed or damaged. But there was a limitation on the location of billboards. And I'll show you some maps that I did add that you haven't seen since the subcommittee meetings. It really helped kind of show what was allowed in the previous code and then what is being proposed in the code that you have before you for your consideration. And so the limitation was that they would only be allowed on properties that were zoned commercial or manufacturing and in these certain areas. So they'd have to be, those two zoning districts, they'd have to be within 615 feet of I-90 or zoned commercial or manufacturing along Northwest Boulevard or along Highway 95 north of Appleway. So those are the only areas they were allowed within city limits. So highlights, again, was really bringing this for your consideration and building back in that structure. So providing a definition to make it more clear so that's different than a different off-premise sign. Providing for the removal of existing non-conforming in exchange for a new location, and we had agreement from the billboard companies that, so the goal with that is if you're allowing one to relocate, we don't want the old one to stay there too, so requiring a demolition permit with that. Having the relocation be within those same, the commercial and the manufacturing zone, so that's consistent with what was allowed before. And then looking at some of our existing codes and blending that back in with planning and zoning setbacks, height separation, things like that. The requirement for a public hearing, that actually came out of that December 19th when Councilmember Gookin made the motion. He suggested that a public hearing could be an appropriate way to allow these to be relocated. So that was kind of built in for consideration. As it's proposed, that those would have more of that limitation. So it would still be the zoning, but it would be within 615 feet of the interstate. And then along, as you can see here, Celtice and I-90. And then this doesn't show up, but I'll show you some other slides. So the other thing in the proposed ordinance would be additional setbacks, so 500 feet from residential zones, schools, churches, parks, cemeteries, and historic districts. So this shows kind of scaled back, blurred out the zoning, but so you can still see the colors. So this is on the left. This is what used to be allowed. These are the only areas any billboard of any size would be allowed. And this is what is being presented for you this evening. So this allows way more areas within the city. Now, this doesn't show the buffers, as I mentioned, or kind of those other setbacks, but it opens up areas along East Sherman, 4th and 3rd Streets, Appleway, over here kind of the best. On 15th Street, you have the new Coeur, you have some areas up along Hanley, so there's quite a few additional areas, and then as well along Prairie.
And Mr. Mayor, may I ask a
Yes,
question?
go ahead.
Hillary, this is a new slide since General Services, correct?
It is, yes.
I appreciate this because I believe I asked you at General Services, is there any sort of visual on?
Right, yes.
So this is very helpful, thank you.
Good, yes, we just thought, because the question came up at both, and we thought we
Yeah.
should do this query and kind of help,
Yeah.
and also because I think the billboard industry is wanting to understand like where they could move. So this, as shown, is what's kind of in the proposed code language. And then this shows the 500-foot buffer from historic properties and schools, parks, churches, and cemeteries. So this was added by Nick, our GIS guy, to kind of show the additional areas where there would be some further setbacks. And this doesn't show the commercial. I'll show you another one that has a little bit more built in. But these are the areas where the larger, the 672 square foot billboards would be allowed. And then this shows if you add in those buffers plus the residentially zoned, you still have all these areas in red and gray that would be allowed. And these were for the larger ones.
So that kind of eliminates East Sherman, doesn't it?
There's still a little peekaboo one here, but it does kind of take that one out as well as most of 3rd and 4th Streets. But there would be one here on East Sherman and Coeur d'Alene Lake Drive that still could be. So there are currently 8 billboards within the city. There's one that you'll see on some of the images that's here, this number 6, that really is kind of 2 structures, but they're all grouped together. And so these are the locations. I'll kind of walk through that. Just for context, when the code was drafted previously to allow the billboards, it was intended to be along more of the interstates and the highways and the higher capacity roadways. Northwest Boulevard was the old highway, so those have the wider right-of-way locations. So these are examples of billboards. I'll kind of flip through those. You've seen these before. This is the one that has been digitized. This is on I-90, south of I-90, and north of Celtice Way by the Honda dealership. Here is one just immediately east of this. So the first one was Lamar, and that one had been digitized. This one is Yesco's. That's within the city, and this is on Celtice Way. Here's one on Northwest Boulevard. You've seen this one previously. It's just one-sided. Here's another one on Northwest Boulevard. It's in between the 2 addresses noted here. This is double-sided. Here's another location on Northwest Boulevard. double-sided, and this is the one that I mentioned that's just south of the US 95 off-ramp. So Northwest Boulevard, north of Hubbard, and it has kind of the two structures with the four sign faces. This one is located on US 95 in Clayton. This one has also been digitized. And this one is US 95 on the east side, just north of the at-home location. Double-sided, one side has two of the 300 square foot, and then the one side facing south is 672 square feet. So because looking at kind of the Billboard code opened up the ability to kind of consider some electronic signs as well, because a lot of them are digitizing, and that's one of the things they want to be doing either in their current locations or if relocation is allowed, but also because we've been receiving complaints about other smaller signs, on-premise signs and other reader boards and things within the city, just the brightness and kind of the distraction and whatnot. And so it was a great opportunity to look at best practices, and we actually were able to get some good feedback from both Lamar and Yesco. The Outdoor Advertising Association of America has standards, best practices, and that we've incorporated those into here, looking at changing it from nits to the foot candles. I'll kind of go through that, having the technology to require the auto dimming on the billboards, holding the displays for longer, and then restricting video messages. Just for context, there are 83 electronic signs within the city. So these are examples of when we don't implement our codes or kind of evaluate what needs to be changed in terms of the brightness and the intensity and the flashing. So this has been mitigated, but this is a sign that if you see it at night, quite distracting. And this is what you would see on your dashboard, so it looks like maybe a cop car. Here's some other examples of electronic messages. So some of them are the reader boards, other ones are the video displays and the images with advertising for the businesses and their products. Here's another example. This one is US 95, just south of Dalton. And the intensity of some of the lights, this has been one where we've had some complaints to the police department and some concerns with the safety of that, just with the intensity of the brightness. So the current code, as mentioned, excuse me, uses nits, and so the tricky thing with that is it's very difficult to have a light meter that can properly read nits, and they're quite a bit more expensive than the foot candles, and it's also not industry standard. So that's one of the things we wanted to change, and then as mentioned, looking at the display time as well as the flashing and blinking. This one, we had some questions at both of the subcommittee meetings, the rotation of signs. So I guess they're called rotary signs, and that's when the actual sign spins, so like the Metro Car Wash one. So that's what this means with the rotation speed, 9 rotations per minute. So this is existing code. And then this one is just talking about subject to the freestanding sign and attached sign regulations. So proposed amendments really to help clarify and look at best practices for ensuring that we aren't having distractions to motorists based on the intensity, the brightness, the frequency of the images changing content, and then the ability to have the technology that does the auto dimming, which is pretty standard practice, or if they can't do that, some of the smaller signs have the ability to program them to be off during certain hours. The foot candles, as mentioned, would be the new measurement, and the 0.3 would be above ambient conditions. So you would take that measurement and you'd look at the ambient light and then you'd do it at the sign. One thing I do want to mention is we did get some feedback that what's in the proposed code was a little unclear because it looked like it was just for billboards, which is based on the Billboard best practices, but there's a way to apply that to smaller signs. I looked at the city of Spokane, and we could do that for signs that are 0 to 100 square feet, and that would be at 100-foot distance, and then in between that and the 350 square feet would be 150 feet. You would do that measurement with the light meter, so easy enough to clarify those. Also, messages to be held a minimum of 8 seconds, and then clarifying no videos or animation, and then, as noted, it is consistent with the best practices, and we've received.
So is that 8 seconds for us slow readers?
It is, so yeah, you'd have to kind of hold that image in mind, and then it would switch to the next one. I think it's that slow count, the 1 Mississippi, 2. All right, proposed amendments. Let's see, it's already covered that slide. So suggestions that came out of the most recent subcommittee meeting, or sorry, from the other one. Reconsidering the need to review the land lease. So there was questions about that, whether or not city attorney needed to review the land lease. clarifying the proposed foot candles is above ambient lighting, as noted, clarifying the rotating signs is that they're spinning. There was a couple of questions that came up about regulating content, and if we could even regulate, for example, if there's a business that sells cannabis legally in Washington, which is allowed there, could that be advertised in Idaho? And Randy did some research, our city attorney, and said that we couldn't regulate that. Similar to gambling, it might be allowed on the reservation, but is not allowed in the city. There's advertisements for that. So that's something that the city would not be able to regulate content for that. Determining if a public hearing should be required, and on that point, just to clarify, public hearings, it's consistent with a lot of our codes for asking for certain things, cell towers and other things that might be a change, conditional use permit, special use permit things. It's really for a process of transparency and allowing the council to make that determination rather than having staff make a determination that could affect sensitive areas.
Question on that,
Sure,
Mr.
go
Mayor.
ahead.
Hillary, I understand that. I understand public feedback and that certainly people that may be affected by change want to speak about it. We just heard about a pedal pushing bicycle because it's written into code that'll come before council. Isn't that maybe a happy medium that meets the needs of business and industry and still it's reviewed by council rather than the rigmarole of a public hearing? I just see that as a good compromise, that it can be written in the same way it was for the pedal bikes.
Certainly, council can direct staff on how you'd like to proceed with any code amendments. So you're saying the decision would still be made by council,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't be a public hearing?
Right.
So there would still be some
There'd
decision
still be
points that would have to be made. with
Public
it.
comment and determined by council.
Yeah, that's,
We do that with liquor, with the alcohol licenses. Because they used to be more formal, and now it's just kind of a heads up.
should I continue on the other ones? The other questions were determining if the underground electrical should be required on-site, if it's available on-site or within 75 feet, so we wanted to clarify that. But I also wanted to mention, I spoke with our building official, Ted Lancy, and he said he was kind of surprised that there was any pushback on that, because even small monument signs underground power, so it seems to be pretty common practice. There was the question on the transitions. There was a recommendation from a community member that suggested having the transition time between the messages be a half a second or less, just so that it's not obvious when it switches, and then having the lighting be downward facing on the non-digitized billboards. And then there was a question on the mobile billboards, so we wanted to provide some images so you could see what is popping up in other communities. And the tricky, so we had looked at them as like structures that could move, so that we're not then splitting them out and then they're in all new locations. The one that's a little weird, so it's really, I think, 9, because the one on Northwest Boulevard south of US 95 and north of Hubbard, that one is really 2 structures that have 2 sign faces. So that one could move as 2 locations, but it wouldn't be able to be 4 locations. So it can't kind of
So
multiply.
it's structure, not necessarily the
Right.
sign.
And then the
face.
face would stay this, they could either have the faces going the same, or they'd probably want to switch it. The typical is that V pattern where they would have it, so it's kind of flared out to see from both driving directions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hillary, can you review again?
Amy.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's in my head.
Just teasing.
I'm sorry.
Glad we
I'm
all do that.
forming my question, being rude. I'm sorry. Mr. Mayor, on your birthday, may I please?
Nice.
Sorry, now I've totally lost my thought because I'm embarrassed.
Forgot what your question was.
Review the work that you've done with our Billboard partners, Lamar and Yesco, because my understanding is they have been part of this draft and have been working closely with city staff. And I'm asking this because we got an email on Thursday with a lot of suggested changes. In my mind, that's somewhat last minute. Our packet came out, and I was surprised to see those suggestions when my understanding was you guys have been working closely.
We had reached out to them when we drafted the first round, and then we requested that they meet with us. So they came and we had a meeting. I think we were there hour and a half, and kind of met with them and heard their concerns. We incorporated some of the changes in there. At that time, there was still, we disagreed on some of the points, but wanted to bring it forward to council. And then we've had them come to both of the subcommittee meetings and provide comment at that time. So I just saw the letter from Lamar today and saw that, and pretty significant changes from what we'd seen.
Thank you.
Dan?
Well, just for my sense is that I think I will certainly fight to keep the, public hearing aspect. This isn't something that's going to come up very often. I mean, this is an incredibly finite, stuff. So I think the public hearing we've had, the public has told us they want public hearings, and I think just to, sign up. Anyway, I think we should do that. And again, the 75, I mean, the underground utility, I mean, you do that at home. So, I mean, having the conduit. So I think those ought to stay.
Christie?
Thank you. Hillary, I was going to ask if you had seen the letter from Lamar. And I guess I took it as they were just still providing input. And obviously, they have a little difference of opinion than staff. That's okay. We can work through these things. From what you saw, you said there were substantial changes, but was there anything that was not something that we couldn't look at?
Let me see, I'll pull.
Was there anything unreasonable, I guess is what I'm asking.
Right. Let's see, okay, so I'm gonna pull the letter.
And if council wants a
One of the
public-
changes that came up in this letter that to my knowledge wasn't mentioned, concerns the height of the billboard.
Oh, I see.
I think the letter created a new measurement of 50 feet to the bottom of the sign. And that wasn't something that we'd seen before.
I have it, yeah, I'm good,
Okay.
thank you. Right, so we had it in the draft proposal that the maximum height would be 48 feet, I believe, and so theirs would be 50 at the bottom, so then now you could go 64 feet potentially or higher for the top of the billboard. They asked to remove any of the zoning restrictions, so basically any of the city, all zoning districts, including any of the PUDs, anything would be allowed for billboards, and no setbacks from any of the residential churches, schools, parks, cemeteries, historic districts, historic properties, and no public hearing, and what were the other ones? So those were pretty significant changes, for sure, especially given that the old code, as I showed you, had the very limited area where they were allowed. They also didn't want to limit the size, so they wanted to allow the 672 square feet to also be anywhere and not have any restrictions of that, so. And then the intersection setback, so that was going from 150 feet to 50 feet, and for context, 50 feet is the size of a standard small downtown lot, so that's your next door neighbor, so that's
Okay.
pretty minimal setback.
I understand that, they're a business and they're trying to work within their confines of their business. What I want council to really consider is, and if they're not comfortable with the changes, so be it. But I want council, and I guess I should speak to council, I want council to, I guess, understand that they do serve local business. And we talk about the board on the boulevard. Everyone I know calls it the Coeur d'Alene Tribe's billboard, and it's not. It belongs to Lamar, but they've been there for 10 years. And so people that come through our community, they see the billboard and they know how to get to the casino. Same with Super One Foods, same with North Idaho College, same with Kootenai Health, same with Silverwood. I could go on and on and on. Why I've been so passionate about this is I know that they serve local businesses. And our role, I think, on council is to support that economic development. So if we can find a way to work with them, and it still works for us, that's what I'd like to see us do. If none of their proposals are acceptable to this council, then we move forward with what staff has proposed. But I had just hoped that there had been, concessions. I think some were made. I appreciate that Troy held a meeting with Lamar, and sounds like it was a good conversation. The letter was good. The letter was nice, Troy. So that's what I'm looking for, is that we support local businesses. It's not about not trying to have, like I said earlier, trying to have a Wild West. That's not it. It's where can we be business friendly?
Kiki?
I have two questions. One is I agree with you on supporting local businesses, for sure. And these signs have been here for a long time, but I also was in advertising for 30 years of my life, and I don't think the local businesses are going to shut down if they don't have a billboard in a certain place. I don't feel like it's that imperative of a thought process. So I'm kind of on the fence with you there. My other question is, we get a letter at the 11th hour. What are we talking about with all of these changes that these companies have been at the table the entire time, and now it's before us to vote to approve, with letter being introduced with all kinds of new information? So can anyone give me clarity on how we should be viewing that?
We could table it for the next meeting if it needed more time.
Or you can look at it as that substantial progress over what they had, and if they want to continue to work with staff down the road, you can do further modifications later.
Well, that's what I tried to read the letter really quickly to try to see what was, if there was, but it seemed like this was really late in the game to bring up stuff that was dramatic. In my mind, a 64-foot versus a 38-foot sign is a pretty dramatic change request that probably should have been brought up when you'd been working with them this whole time. So I feel like we kind of need to we can table it if you choose to do that and address the letter, but I kind of feel like we need to move on. And I'm also was going to comment on the public hearing thing. I see what you're saying about why put this through the whole public hearing process, but literally, would the public hearing take that much longer than the public comment at the very same meeting? I mean, like today, we had public comment, they all made their statement, we had the ability to do that. A public hearing is kind of like open the meeting, close the meeting is the difference. And then that little bit of discussion that gives us more information. So I feel like the public hearing is probably fine, so.
If I may respond, Mayor? It isn't about opening and closing the meeting. That's great. People should be giving their public comment. I think there's more requirements by the business when they're required to go through a public hearing. Isn't there notifications they have to send out?
The city sends them out, so they just have to do the application.
It's more by the city than.
The city does all of that?
They pay for the title report and the mailing labels, and the city does all the noticing for a public hearing.
Yeah. So, I just appreciate that council is willing to have these discussions. I completely support that they are able to move the billboard when they've got, and I've used the Coeur d'Alene Tribes billboard for an example. We've talked about Northwest Boulevard, how great it would be to maybe get some of those older billboards off the boulevard, but they're still serving the community, they're still serving their clients, and they're in a more of a business district. So to me, it's a win-win for all of us, and so I'd like to move forward with this.
Mr. Mayor.
Dan?
Well, I think, yeah, we need to keep going, and in terms of, the letter at the end, and how do we do that, and it's like, it's one more piece of information that, we duly note, but nothing, but then, make a decision. I certainly have enough information to make a decision.
Christie, would you like to make a motion?
I said I don't have a conflict of
I don't want to
interest.
put you on the spot.
No, I don't have a conflict of interest. I don't want anyone else to be uncomfortable. I'm not.
Oh.
I'll move forward.
Amy, did you have?
Did you have another question? You don't want
Well,
to comment?
I did, but I can make it after discussion as well. Well, I just want to say that, thank you. And thank you to Lamar and Yesco for being at the table and working with our staff. I like the shift on our electronic message displays. I like our changes there. I'm very supportive of those. I am not in support of moving billboards. I just cannot support it with the aesthetics of our community. And I have struggled with it, and I've tossed it around every which way. And for me, it's leaving a legacy in my time at council and how the city looks moving forward. Billboards are there for how long have those billboards been there? I don't know. I'm guessing 40 years, maybe not that long. But they're there for a really long time. I do like the public hearing portion. It gives a transparency to the process. It allows community members to come and give us feedback. This will make a big impact. moving a billboard to a new location that otherwise did not have a billboard there. So I am hesitant to do that, and so if that's the motion, I will be voting no.
Further discussion?
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
Sure.
Oh, you can. Yeah, you can make the motion.
Actually, what I would do is make a lot of sausage up here, because there's a lot of this stuff that I think could be pulled out, because it's just, like I said earlier, too much government. You know, it's a lot of stuff that's basically requiring the businesses to do what they already do, and getting us involved in, you know, just gumming up the works. And I know this is a big deal. I understand what Amy's saying, and I understand what Jeff said. But I just don't like a lot of government, you know, telling people, businesses what to do. And, you know, I think they do a great job. We're limited to 8. We'll never have that many more. Was it 8 or 9? I guess 9 if you count the
9.
one as 2. You know, we'll never have that many more billboards in the city. So it's not like we're going to be seeing lines of these things like we used to back in the 60s. Well, some of us did. And so I could make a lot of sausage here and start pulling stuff out of this. I do not like the hearing. You know, on the positive part, they would move one billboard and there would be one hearing, and then we won't get another one for 10 years, even if they decide to move it again. The one map you showed was great, because I think it really narrows down where these things could be moved to. And it would really surprise me to look at the companies, because I bet their map is the same, because they want high visibility, high traffic. I mean, they're not going to put it out on 15th and Best, even though they could, because they want to see, you know, impressions. How many people are driving by per hour. That's what they sell it by. So I would make a motion to pull all this stuff out. It would take longer. It's getting later. You know what? And so I would just go ahead and make the motion. Let's try this. Let's make a motion. Oh, we get to start with dispensing the rules. Well, that'll be an easy one. Motion to dispense with the rule and read Council Bill number 24. Is this right? The right thing?
Yeah.
24-1009 once by title only. See, that's the easy part.
I'll second that.
Motion second, discussion on the motion.
And again, this is just to waive the rule so we don't have to read it 3 times.
Will the clerk take the roll, please?
English.
Yes.
Wood.
Yes.
Evans. Miller.
Aye.
McEvers. Gookin.
Yes.
Will the clerk read the title, please?
Council Bill Number 24-1009, an ordinance providing for the amendment of Sections 1550-210, 1550-400 Section C, 1550-410 Section H, pertaining to billboards, and 1550-400 Section D, pertaining to electronic message displays of the Coeur d'Alene Municipal Code, providing for the repeal of conflicting ordinances, providing for severability, providing for the publication of a summary of the ordinance, and providing for an effective date hereof.
So now comes the sausage. Should we go for it, or do you want to get out of here?
I think as written is at this point.
Yeah, as much as I don't like this, and what I would say to the companies, if you're still here, is as this moves forward in its current state, which I think is the easiest way to get it done, come back to us and let us know where the hiccups are, where things are that you would like to fix later. I think the goal that most of us have up here, I believe, is we want to allow them to move the billboards. We think that would be fine, you know, make more money, support more local businesses. But as this moves forward, I think we can, and we should probably revisit it and see if there's any fine tuning that can happen. Obviously, getting the amount of feedback and material we have, I think that would be necessary, but just to make sure that you guys can get underway moving billboards, let's just move forward with it the way it's written, even though I X'd out a lot of stuff in this code. I don't want to sit here and read it all. So I will just go ahead and make the motion to adopt Council Bill number 24-1009.
Second.
You have a motion and a second. Further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Will the clerk take the roll, please?
English.
Yes.
Wood.
Yes.
Evans.
No.
Miller.
Aye.
McEvers.
No.
Gookin.
Yes.
Motion carries.
And Mr. Mayor, being your birthday, I would like to make a motion to recess to June 24th, 2024 at high noon here in the Community Library Room located at 702 East Front Avenue for a workshop regarding the fiscal year 24-25 budget.
Second.
All those in favor, respond with aye.
Aye.
Opposed with nay. Motion carries. We are recessed.